Good morning, folks, and welcome to the workshop of Armitage Lover. And welcome to a new iron review. This is quite exciting because I've not been sent a new set of irons for some time. So I've been sent these irons, brought these irons. I did some consultation work with the London Leather Workshop last year, and Sarah brought up 2 sets of irons for me. These irons are interesting. So they are sold by the London Leather Workshop. So I'll put the URL at the bottom there. So if you want to go and buy them, certainly available in the UK. Over the pond, it will become clear where you can go. But the nice thing about this, and I had this conversation with Sarah about this in quite a bit of detail, there are a number of companies that are selling irons that are having those irons made for them. They're just putting their stamp on them as their irons, which, let's face it, a lot of companies do. It's just branding. However, Sarah says, well, I'm actually quite happy to say where I got these irons from and who made them. And I think this lends a little more credibility to the irons by doing so. I have 2 sets of irons. They're both made by Kevin Lee. Now, Kevin Lee is a maker we know and trust. So, putting his name to these lends, I feel, a little bit more credibility to the irons. So, we have the basic set of irons. That's what we're going to be talking about here. So, this video is going to be specifications, thoughts and feelings, and use, practical application of them, what we think, how they work, and the like. And you're going to be in a position where you can make the decision as to whether these irons are for you. This is what you want. There's a little bit of adaptation that I feel you need to be aware of, that you would need to do to make them work at their optimal level. If you're happy with that, then the price point is good. So we've got 3 irons, and this is the distinct thing here. So this is the basic stitching iron set. On the website they're called chisels. I'll disagree with that all day long. They're not chisels. Chisels are something that you chisel out a piece of wood with. So Sarah, if you're watching, consider changing that. They are irons, and in this set, and that's the thing here, you are buying a set. You get a 2-tooth, a 5-tooth, although I think it says 4-tooth on the website, and a 10-tooth. You're getting all 3 irons. And you're getting all 3 irons for £35.99, £36. Now currently these are made and stamped up with the London Leather Workshop and sold by the London Leather Workshop, so only available in the UK. But I'm sure if you want to get these, you speak with Sarah, talk and have a chat about the possibility of getting them shipped to where you are. Or you've got the option of speaking to Kevin Lee direct if you are perhaps further east and Kevin is closer to you than London is. They are made from, I believe it's a stainless steel, but it's actually 4CR13 steel. I'm not an expert on steel. I'm going to stand by. What I will say is I'm not hearing any scuttlebutt on the tinterweb about Kevin Lee irons bending or breaking. So I think the choice of steel that he's using to make these tools from is likely to be a good choice. The hardness, so once they're made, they are Rockwell hardened to between 52 and 54. So not the hardest, but then again we're not looking at knife edges, we are looking at tools that punch through leather. So bringing that hardness down offers a little more flexibility to the tool, because a lot of companies that are using a much cheaper, weaker steel are over hardening it. We are hearing about teethes snapping, and a lot of that is down to how it's being used, but ultimately these aren't taken right up to best part of 60, which could be too hard, too brittle, and even an inappropriate lean with the tool while it's in the leather causes the teeth to snap. So it's possible that actually that's a good figure for this steel. So the steel is likely to be a good choice. Now the angle of the teeth on these is 52 degrees. I, on paper, would say, oh, can we bring it down to 45 a little bit more? Because 45 is just that sweet spot. But truth be told, actually, don't look bad. So, and bearing in mind, we've got some Blanchard irons in the used to be that went up to 60, and they still worked. So 52 is what they are. 45, I think, is a sweet spot, but nonetheless, they work. And you will see that towards the end of the video when you see me actually using it. The tooth width. Now, the distinct thing, so if we do a bit of a zoom in here, is that these teeth are tapered. So the makeup of this iron is a stitching iron. It is not a pricking iron. So if we zoom in a bit and we have a look at the teeth, we can see that the makeup of this iron is that of a pricking iron, not a stitching iron. The tooth tapers, and it tapers from 1.9 at the tip up to 3.1 at the top. So we've got 1.2 millimeter expansion going up towards the top. But here's the thing. In the used to be, when we had irons like this, the teeth were probably half the length, 5 mil, 6 mil or so. These are 10 millimeters long. So even if we were to split the difference and say, well, if we went, and we'll call it 2 and 3 for argument's sake. So if we went 5 mil up, that's going to be no more than 2.5 mil. That's only very slightly larger than the tips of some other irons. Many other makers have their teeth set at 2.2. Drive that in just a little bit, we're straight into the 2.5. So in the grand scheme of things, in theory, you could drive this through a 5 millimeter piece of leather and not see any detriment to that. So the length of the tooth is having a huge impact. The final spec is what's available to you. So the sets come in 3 sizes. 3.38 8 SPI, 3.85 7 SPI, and 4 mil, which is what these ones are, 6 SPI. There is no reverse option. But for a £36 set, and you would be struggling to find a single iron for that price for another maker. That cannot really be argued with. No, they're not the best on the planet, but equally they are far, far above the worst. We know they're made by Kevin Lee. They're thinner, they're smaller, less steel, less cost. Right down the end here, towards the end of the tool, it's only 1.5 millimeters thick. That's not to say it is not capable of doing the job, but that is to say it's perhaps not up for abuse. So if we're going to drive these in and wobble them, especially when we start looking at the 2-tooth, if we put that and use it like a lever, you're gonna break it. But if you use it properly and consistently, then you're not going to have an issue with them. Certainly the way people have been using them here under instruction and told how to do it properly, they've achieved all day long, and nobody struggled with any form of damage. So how we make our holes is quite important. How we treat the iron whilst we're making the holes is quite important. Get all of those right, they're going to last for you. But even if you turn around and say, well, I'll just get started, I want to find me feet. I don't want to spend a fortune on irons at the outset. I want something to find out if this craft is for me, to find out if I've got an aptitude for this craft. 36 quid is not a gamble at all. And there's a good chance that even if you decide to elevate beyond these in a while, you will keep them, because there may be occasions you go, that fits, I'll keep those, I'll hang on to them, they're useful. So that's the specifications. What are my thoughts and feelings on them? I think, and this is opinion, this is my thoughts and feelings, how I feel about these irons. I feel they're a bit small in my hand. I have big polar bear hands. I like something with more substance, and these just are under that. That is not to say I cannot use them. I can use them all day long. They fit in the hand. We've got these lovely shoulders here that the thumb and forefinger rest on, so we can really apply some downward force, holding that steady in preparation of striking. So using them is not a problem. It's just a personal preference. I would like a larger iron. It feels more comfortable in my hand. I would perhaps like a little bit more substance, but the caveat to this is if with a thicker iron you get a thicker tooth. You know, it all goes hand in hand. That is it. Slightly larger, a little bit thicker, yeah, it's a win. The other thing that I'm not 100% happy about, but again, this is the price point, is the edge of these teeth are quite sharp. And just to highlight that here, if I lay the tooth on the top of this leather here, right in the middle, and push down, we can see we're cutting leather. So leather's actually coming off here because the edge of these teeth are sharp. What does this mean for you? This means when we drive the tooth in, however far we drive it in, that's the size of the hole that we're cutting. In an ideal world, with a good iron, the edge of this tooth, like the edge of the awl, is soft. The only hole that gets cut is by the tip of the tooth. That's the size of the hole that we want. As we then drive the tooth into the leather, it stretches the leather. When we take the iron out, the hole begins to close up, and in stretching the hole larger, it rounds the rim of the hole, which means the thread sits nicer, and it also prevents the hole tearing at either end if we apply too much tension. If we cut the hole to that size, as we apply tension, we can extend the length of that hole through tearing the leather because it's cut all the way to the tip. So that is a negative. We could turn around and say, well, we're not buying those, we want to send them back, and we're going to say, polish them. Absolutely. Here they are polished, they're now £60. So that's your caveat. You're paying £36. You are getting a smaller iron, you are getting a thinner iron, and you are getting an iron that perhaps would benefit from a little bit of care. And all you would need to do, if you have a polishing mop, that will do it. I've not done this because I wanted this evident on the reviews. But you could take it to a polishing mop and just soften them up. It really is not going to need much. So I have a really, really thin rule here. It's flexible. That's 0.5 millimetre thick. And I have some emery cloth. I'm not going to do it to the long iron, because I want to use that and show you what that's like. So what I'm going to do is take some emery cloth, and this is 1000 grit, and just wrap it around that edge like that. And then all I'm going to do, and then go between each tooth and rub it up and down. Just like that. Turn it around. Do the other side. It's probably little more than that. That has had an impact. If we try now to scrape that along, it's still there, but it's nowhere near as bad. So that, and bearing in mind that took me minutes, if you spend a little bit more time doing that, not the tips, just the body, the edges of the teeth, and just taking that harsh edge off, but they will work differently. They will not cut the hole anywhere near as severely. Yeah, that's a huge difference. Huge. So I'm just going to polish these up like this. Then I'm going to use these teeth and the other teeth, and we're going to have a look at the difference between them. So more importantly, how do they work? So let's get a piece of leather. We are going to go back to our 10 tooth. This has the sharper aspect, so we look at that. That cuts our leather. We're then going to use the 5 tooth that we polished up. There's absolutely nothing there. All I'm going to do now is just prick along this line. I'm not going to open the holes up. I'm just going to be marking, pricking, if you like, which the design of the tool is telling us it's for. I can immediately see that these holes are much higher. They're standing up more because they're closer to this 54. Like I say, Blanchard in the past went as extreme as 60. So there we see that 54 standing up. And we see the size of the hole that we are getting. It's not hideous. A little bit more upright than I would like, but nonetheless, you can still achieve with it. For a 6 SPI iron 4mm, that's a very small hole. Very, very small hole. So what we're going to do now is we are going to drive our iron into it. Ultimately, the design of it is a pricking iron. But how many people are actually going to spend 36 quid on a set of 3 pricking irons? I don't think it's likely. I think it's likely that the more people that will buy this will use it as a stitching iron. So that's the question, and that's what I do with most of the irons, is can it be used as a stitching iron? And I feel, because of the length of the tooth, it's 10mm, and the fact that this taper is 1mm over 10mm, yeah, I think it probably can. So let's well, I know it can, because this is what I've had people do, so a bit sneaky there. So that's exactly what we're going to find out. I am going to pop my iron back onto the hole, and I'm going to punch through, and I'm looking for a good 3mm of steel poking out the back of the leather. So let's have a quick look. What have we got? 1, 2. I am just very, very slightly shy of 3mm. Let's over-egg the pudding, shall we? So we've gone through there 4mm. That's a huge amount of steel poking out the back for a tooth of this style. But what does that give us? Well, if we take that away, take our pull-in block, the original, often copied, never credited, that's what we get. So we've taken this tooth, which is a tapered pricking iron style, in a piece of leather that is 3.5mm thick. And we had 4mm. So we've used 7.5mm of steel. We've gone in really deep, and this is what we get. That is not hideous. There are other irons out there that are designed as stitching irons that will give you a much, much bigger hole. The truth is, for 6 SPI, I would expect a much bigger hole anyway. But that is actually quite a delicate little hole. But it works. We're still going to find out how it stitches. 6 SPI would be an ideal candidate for perhaps a 0.8mm thread. We are not going to get a 0.8mm thread through that hole. It's a very fine hole. I would suggest your sweet spot with most irons, 7 SPI, is a 0.6mm thread. I think we may even struggle with a 0.6 going through that hole. That could probably be really, really good looking with a 0.45 size of the hole, but the distance between the holes is a little far. So we can have a look perhaps with a 0.6, but if you were to buy perhaps the 3.85 or 3.38, I would give consideration, if the tooth size were the same, to use something like a 0.45 thread. I think that with the holes closer together, the holes being much smaller, that could actually look really smart. I'm going to be using 0.6 because of the size of the SPI. But I'm going to continue exactly as I've done before. Pop that through there. Plenty of steel poking out the back. Never pull the iron out of the leather. Let's talk about that, because I talked about damaging tools. What am I doing to make my holes? Well, here I have a block. So this is one of those rubberized blocks from Oka, Japan. They're not expensive. It's like a really hard plastic rubber, and they put their irons into it, and they say it's fantastic because you can iron it flat again, which I thought was genius. So I've got a bunch of these. Now, I don't like the hardness of this with high quality irons. If you're using the Seiwa, Craftshark, Kyoshin LE style diamond teeth, or the Oka style, absolutely fine, because they're very, very robust. But if you're using a stitching or pricking style iron, I think this could blunt your irons. So what I've done is I've got some 4mm thick clear PVC and glued it to the top. I'm never really going to go beyond 4mm with these irons. So this PVC accepts the iron, is very sympathetic. It's no different to gluing a piece of leather to a piece of wood, except this is much cheaper than a piece of leather. So this, we can see, has been heavily used. When it gets to the point that it's been too heavily used, we take it off, we put a new piece on. I think this overall piece cost me just under £1. So piece of leather, probably talking about £8. Even cheap leather is going to be £4, so it's cheaper than leather. This accepts the tooth really nicely, keeps the leather at the back flat. We put the iron on, keeping the iron upright. We then drive the iron through. This puts the iron into the leather. Perhaps we have it a little closer to level. This drives the iron through the leather. Go up. Really in there. And then the teeth sit into the pad. We pull them out the pad, push the leather off, and that's what we get. A really nice, consistent set of holes. Let's do that one more time. Have you noticed that the iron is going in at an angle? This is because I feel it's a bit small in my hand and I'm not gripping it well enough to be able to govern it. But nonetheless, it works. I am achieving, and yes, I'm ragging this leather around, and we're getting quite a small hole. Now, this iron has a bit of a sharp edge to its tooth. I have polished this off. Let's have a look at the difference between the two. So if I'll make a set of holes really close, first and foremost, they feel like they go in better. There is a marked difference What is that difference? Here we have a very small looking hole because the tool is cutting the leather, so it's giving way. Here we have what appears to be a larger hole but made with the same tool. And the reason being is the leather isn't being cut, it's being forced open. So as it's being stretched, more leather is getting in on that game and therefore is helping the tool to stretch. So this is a stretched hole, this is a cut hole. So we can see the distinct difference, and it becomes quite obvious that we have a much rounder edge to our hole than we do at the top here where it's cut. This is what I would expect. Now, what we have here is not necessarily what we are going to end with. So what I'm going to do first is get a cloth and I'm just going to rub up and down, flattening that leather off. And just doing that has begun to close the holes up a little. But that bottom row of 5 is looking rather smart. We can then take a dome-headed hammer and tap down our holes even further. And there we will get a much closer representation to what our holes are going to look like. And we can see there that actually they both begin to look a little more similar. But I think that hole that's rounded is better for the leather. I think that hole that's rounded is better for the stitch. And I think if you were to take this tool to a bit of emery cloth and sand and polish those edges to get that, you would have an awesome looking stitch every time. This is the thing. Well, why don't they send them? I think they should send these irons out polished. And they can, trust me. There isn't much Kevin can't do. But you will pay for it. So if he's got to look at every iron that's just been made and say, right, I've got to polish all of these, we've got a cost implication, and that cost is going to get transferred onto you. If you've got the money, then perhaps you can say, well, I'm looking for a set of polished irons, but this is not what this is about. This actually says basic in the title. So if you're looking for a basic set, you are getting a basic set. But you, with a little bit of effort, can take that basic set onto perhaps a bit of a medium above basic set, because that set of holes looks quite nice. What we're going to do now is stitch the holes. We're going to stitch the holes as they come out of the iron with the sharp edges, because we want to see if with tension those holes tear. If they do, then perhaps we give consideration to, before stitching anything, we give them a polish and then soften that edge up. If they don't tear, then perhaps they work out the packet absolutely fine. Shall we take a look? So we've got ourselves set up in the clam, 4mm irons, 1.9mm hole, sharp, so the holes are cut, not stretched. 3.5mm thick leather. We're going to use 0.6mm tiger thread. Just drop that down a little lower. I'm not going to worry about back stitches. If you want to look at stitching in far more detail, I have 4 really long videos on that very subject on this channel. Go and take a look. And on that note, if you're enjoying what you're seeing, if you want to see more of this rubbish and me chatting at you about things, hit like and subscribe. The more people that do it, the more love that I feel from you lot, the more inclined I am to do it. So, you know, it's a self-fulfilling thing. Stitching. Let's have a bash. What I'm looking for here, I'm thinking teeth are very small. It's probably going to benefit from a finer thread because the holes are dinky. However, First impressions, that second needle is catching, which is indicative of a very slightly smaller hole. But nonetheless, I am not fighting. I think if we went through more layers, we may find we're having a little bit more of a pull on the second needle to get it through. With making things out of leather using the modern style of stitching, we shouldn't be fighting our stitching, because that stresses the leather and that ultimately affects how our stitching looks. We should be finding a point of comfort and fluidity, so we're not stressing the leather and we get the best from it. Equally, if stitching's difficult, there's a good chance you got your combination wrong. And if it's difficult, you're not enjoying it. If you're not enjoying it, you're not inclined to do it, and you kind of, I'm not going to do it today, and you're missing out. So, what am I looking for? I'm looking for this 0.6 to go through. Could I get the 0.8 through? Probably, yeah. I think I might be able to. Would it be a little bit more of a battle? Yes, but the thread is thicker and that stands to reason, but I don't think it would be unachievable. Is there any cutting at the end of the hole? So I'm just going to take it off camera for a minute. So because the edge of the tooth was sharp, the hole is cut all the way to the end, whereas we look at softening that and the holes were rounded. So therefore the hole was stretched, it wasn't cut. So my concern with a sharp tooth that's all the way up the length of it, like a sharp awl, is we are cutting all the way to the end of the hole. And when we tension, that tension separates and begins to tear the leather. And I'm looking for any tearing at the end of the hole. And I will be absolutely brutally honest with you, I'm not seeing any. So either, if it's happening, it's very, very subtle, or if it is happening, the thread is hiding it, but there is nothing visible. If it were visible, it would be a problem. If it's happening and it's not visible, not so much of a problem, because that's as much power. It's at that moment here, when we apply that tension, that it's going to be under the most duress. The minute that we relax, it's done. It will never be pushed to that limit again. So there's very little that will happen to this that will cause it to tear further. You know, we think about use and how it's going to get used. It's the hole isn't being stressed. The stitch will, but that's lateral. But when we're in line with our hole, the only time that's suffering is that moment of tension. Once you finish tension, that's it. So if it doesn't happen at that moment, it's not going to happen. And I'm not seeing it. So if we were to use these straight out of the box without polishing, they'll be fine. I would recommend you do polish, because they'll go in, they'll come out so much easier. They won't tear the leather. They will make the hole and the surface of the stitch look better. It will all work for you. But for the time being, we are not unhappy with that. Now, I'm not doing anything to the back of the leather here at all. Our face is looking nice. Our back is looking a little flat. So what I'm going to do is get a pen and mark the top of the leather. So I'll just put a pen mark on top. So I'm just going to adjust what I do at the back of the leather. Tension out, tap down. I am curious, because every iron will give you a different result. Sometimes when we have a big tooth and it's comfy, it causes the stitch to sit a certain way. But this is actually quite a small hole, which means the thread may well behave very, very slightly differently in it. And if we just do that little tug at the back, and it's the sort of thing that we would do if we were stitching 2 layers together, we wouldn't expect to see a good stitch on the back of a single layer of leather. But in section 1, that's what you see me do, because it's all about technique. In section 2, you see me add another piece of leather, and we're making that distance between the front and the back greater, so therefore the chance of a better looking stitch on the back is there. However, because the nature of the hole that we're making is quite dinky, I'm curious as to, do we have that opportunity to get a better looking stitch on a thinner piece of leather early on? Hence the line and the change in stitching style. So this is going to be my last one, and we will have a cheeky look at the back to see if any difference is evident. Not really, no. It's not a bad looking stitch on the back, but ultimately, because of what's happening, we're only going through 1 layer of leather. We've got this casting business where the 2 threads are trying to occupy the same space, and we are prioritising the front over the back. Our front will always look better than our back. I can see a little bit of variation and perhaps tearing there, but it is incredibly subtle. The back, very slight elongation. I think if it actually were closer to 45, that tearing may be greater. Ultimately, our stitching does not look too shabby. We are not seeing it in the best light. Let's have a look at just tapping down very briefly. Now we're seeing it in the best light. We flatten those stitches down, so therefore the vibrancy of the colour has come back. We've closed the holes up behind us, so any inconsistencies that we may have as a result of our stitching have gone. We've got a lovely flat surface of leather, and we certainly cannot see any detrimental tearing to the holes at the moment. We can also see that even though these are sitting at 52 degrees, which is a little further up than I would like, a little bit further down to 45 would be nicer, we are getting a good looking stitch. There's nothing wrong with that. That 52 actually works beautifully. So we get a really credible looking stitch. The back is nothing if not consistent. No, it's not as angular as we would like, but that being said, it is still a very consistent stitch. But we would never judge the back of our stitching on a single layer of leather. There's no reason to stitch a single layer of leather because we know the stitching on the back will look less than it could. There's lots working against us. The surface of the leather, the fact the holes are made from the other side and all the fibres are pointing out. There's a whole conversation there. And if you want to argue the point, we're doing it over a coffee, not in the comments. But that is a good looking stitch. That is an effective iron. It is a budget iron. That's the thing to remember. Is it perfect? No. No, not at all. Could it be better? Could be bigger, could be polished, could be this, could be that, could be all sorts. Could be a lot more expensive. For 36 quid, you're getting 3 irons and they are effective. It's a win. That's it. I get asked a lot, you don't knock any tools that you're sent. No, because if somebody sends me a tool that evidently is substandard, it's not going to work, what's the point of me making a video telling you how bad that tool is? I send it back and say it doesn't work because of this, this and this. Give them the opportunity to adjust, and that's happened over the years a number of times. They've then sent an updated version that does work, and at which point it gets reviewed and it's positive because it's effective. But it would be unfair to say a value iron lives in a premium bracket. So if we judge this value iron, because it says basic, as a premium item, we can say, well, it's not this, it's not that, it's not that. But it also doesn't carry the premium price, it carries the basic price. So that's the bracket in which we judge it. So at its level, if you are looking for a basic value iron, you would not go far wrong with something of this calibre. Does it work? Yes. Can you make it better? Yes. Is it fit for purpose? Yes. Do you get a good result from it? Yes. What's not to like? Simple as that. On sale from the London Leather Workshop. Brilliant. UK is really difficult to buy irons. This is a huge opportunity that you can source. You can order it, well, maybe not today because it's gone 3 o'clock, but you could order it tomorrow and it'll be here the next day. That's better than 6 weeks, isn't it? And I think this is a huge label. It's made by Kevin Lee, a tool maker we know and trust. Can't go wrong there, can you? So that is the basic, dinky, child size, slimline, sharp iron from the London Leather Workshop, produced by Kevin Lee, and available as a set in 2, 5 and 10 teeth for £36. What's not to love? Folks, I hope you find that helpful. Go and have a look at the London Leather Workshop. See what else they've got. Have a chat with Sarah. I'm sure they can help. If you've got any direct questions, if you've got any something, if you start putting a detailed question in the comments, there's a possibility I might just miss it. But if you've got a burning question, send me an email, nigel@armitageLeather.com. I'm going to get it. I'll email you back. Observations. If you've got any irons you want reviewing, get in touch. We'll talk. But these are going to stay in the workshop because I think the value of students that watch this, that come to the workshop and go, I want to try them. I don't have a big budget, can't really afford to spend a fortune. That looks like it's right up my street. Can I try them? Absolutely you can. And they can make an informed decision. But if they produce a rose stitching that looks like that, they are not going to be unhappy. There's nothing wrong with that rose stitching. I could have produced that, told a little bit of a porcupine and said they're the best irons in the world, and 99% of you wouldn't know any different. You'd believe me. So really, in the grand scheme of things, what's not to love? Hope it helps. Hope you've taken something from it. If you've got any questions, detailed questions, email. If you've got any comments, drop them below. I'll also put in the description the link to the London Leather Workshop and the irons. And if you want to hit like and subscribe, I'll make more jolly videos for you to have a look at. Folks, take care. Enjoy.